my God, my legs are sore. And my quads feel tight. And it's working. Every time I do about 6 sets just on my quads, it just goes boom right there. My quads are very underdeveloped though. My legs are only like 23. I've had tree stump size legs for myself. I have very small ankles and a smaller medium frame bone structure. So that's why these dumbbells, I'm waiting for this one 55-pound dumbbell to get here. It's supposed to come any minute. It's a Wayward dumbbell. And really just trying to stay away from social media as much as possible because I'm so sick of hearing about this Charlie Kirk case. And seeing the disparate compartmentalizing measures, right? That the hand, the octopus, the spider, Operation Gladio, the 1001 Club. Less people see the fact that there's no partisanship whatsoever. And I have a lot of emotion involved with this because I tried to block Charlie Kirk's proselytizing ads that were being forced at me, knowing my demographic, knowing what I tend to go back to. Most people would think that I'm a far right reaching person, but I'm not. Absolutely not. In fact, I never have voted. I've always known what was going on with the voting system, and I never will vote. I'm also a very militaristic minded person, all the way down to my birth date and my personality type. But I'm absolutely not somebody who would ever patriotically back the US because I've always seen the agenda behind it. I've always known what's happening, and then to go through life and to not have my suspicions mirrored back to me to where it's like, no, dude, there's something wrong with you. You're crazy. I mean, that would have been a more refreshing realization than to see that the schizophrenia exists outside in society. There is no polarity. The polarity creates entropy. There's not even chaos. The chaos that's produced, I mean, think about it. Think about how rapidly we like to think, oh, these wildfires are going out of control. Everybody's, freaked out. And it's like, eventually the fire will be, put out. The entire world's not going to burn. It's the expedient pressure to end it now, to get it now. It's this time variant or this regulation. And when you let go of that, all your worries are gone. So in summary, we have a very short-sighted fuse. You have people who are just 100% going toward an agenda without ever questioning. So this gets into the areas of development. When you develop yourself as a self, right? It doesn't involve any made up languages, any cosmopolitan world travel. It's all bullshit. You could go to the depths of Siberia at this point and fucking walk into a coffee business that looks just like fucking Starbucks. Everything is a strip mall. Everything is heavily banal and regulated. And that's accepted by people of a certain exposure or experience. It's assumed without taking in the direct correlation that many of these people are re-embodied and reincarnation is an absolute with certain pocketed individuals, not everyone. I mean, there's NPC players, there's all of these variants exist. To stand behind one ideology or one presupposition is to really limit yourself to the grandiosity of the scope of not just the cosmos, but dimensional probabilities and patterns, you know? And I find the staunch mind, the brain, right? As people think that they are matriculating toward education and they know just what they want to be, it's so disparate and compartmentalized and isolated and small, you know, that somebody would become a language specialist without really taking into account that that language that they're studying is useless. It's worthless. It was made up because there was a ruler in charge, like a Genghis Khan, who came into power by force. And through that force, we see this with Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, right? Through this force, everyone was forced to copy this said individual, all the way down to their dialectical patterns, nuances, speech, and suddenly they're using xing sha instead of shang sha. They're saying xing sha. And these nuances become enunciations, right? And like I've known people who speak different variants of, you know, everyone from Chinese to Thailand to, you know, and it's interesting to listen to the dialectical exchange because you can tell that there's very much a root pattern going on there, but that the algorithm sort of sets them apart, right? How loud or how soft or how pronounced a certain enunciation, you can have the same word that means 8 to 10 different things. Do I want to learn it? Fuck no. Do I want to learn Mandarin? Right? I don't. I don't want to learn anything. I don't want to learn anything more about this world than the existential. And that doesn't mean that I'm undeveloped, because I know the importance of what true development means. And it is not ignorance. And it has to do with primary principles that elude the vast majority. And when you see that this partisanship is being played between two sides, how stupid do people have to be, right? The crazy thing is that everyone sounds so literate and well-read, and most people, so this is what's happening with social media, is it's creating this bit file information so that people know what to say, so that other people won't question them and go into this entire dialectical diatribe of, okay, let's break down Moby Dick. Have you really read it, right? Let's break down Crime and Punishment. Have you actually read that book, right? Let's break down some great pieces of literature and see, do you actually understand the higher meaning, right? But they learn so many bit phrases and then they learn how to pathos, rhetoric, sway, travel in and out, and then condense and reduce the conversation into a 1 hour podcast, right? It's like nobody's going to stop you. And for that time, that's when you earn your bread and butter. And if you aren't questioned, right? If you don't have to create. So ChatGPT, did you see the interview, which I would have never watched it? Another staunchy person that I watch that I kind of enjoy, kind of, sort of, because I see these deeper implications of this individual, Kevin with Eek Acres. And then I'm all of a sudden just astounded by how shallow he is and how he just goes back to this fundamentalist crux, right? But you have him yesterday in a video talking about Tucker Carlson and that interview that Tucker Carlson did with Sam Altman, right? He thought it was Sam Alton because he never heard of the guy really. But here Kevin is, he's deathly afraid of AI. He's deathly, like, you have something that can actually, it doesn't matter if it can think. If it understands non-Euclidean spherical mathematics, if it understands the ones and zeros, if it gets that, or the zeros and ones, let's say, minus and plus, right? Because there's really 3 states there, okay? If it understands that, then it understands more than we do if this is a Konrad Zuse, Alan Turing componentry of codified computational subsets and systems, if that's what this really is, the matrix, right? So it's like the matrix of power and control. Where's the energy ever going to be? You might have a pre-existent ontology or a universe or a cosmos that exists by way of what we would assumably say is nature and follows a natural order. But that once you commandeer the energy and you reroute it, you just keep, you turn down the omniscient and you turn up like an equalizer, the artificial rerouting, right? So that's why I say that whatever is in charge, it is a very primal, if we get into God, why Abraxas and other deities, you can get into Anu, right? And so forth, but these other supreme progenitors, originators, right? But not really a progenitor, right? And that's really what Prometheus stands for, but more so Marduk, right? That you have, so the big question, it was Tiamat or Tiamat, the daughter of Anu, right? Was she, and the lover of her son and her, right? And her, she was, her son was her lover, Kingu, right? So this type of stuff, it's like, oh, wow, that's incestuous. And it's like, let me tell you, it's all incestuous. Everyone is your brother and everyone is your sister. Like, we want to see the differences. Even when you're looking at these people challenged between this massive person, you see like Brian Shaw, but he's dealing with gravity the same way that you do. He's dealing with the propensity of his genetics. And the truth is, when you stand us next to each other, next to a 30-foot tall giant, right? Or fey folklore, fairy lore of how small these little beings were said to be, right? When you look at the grand scope of that, or even more so, you go down into the Planck wall, right? You see that there is a huge difference, segmenting between these quadrants or zones of how the optics of light, electromagnetism, and even more so, strong and weak nuclear forces interact with said bodies, right? That you have a completely different physics. And so instead of looking at these realities that we can see and seeing that this reality is the tip of a dimensional iceberg, right? And that if you were to go into each and every quadrant and zone, that too is almost like this vortex band of information that is a locked-in codified system of a looping pattern. And it directly ties into vortices. And if you ever look up primer fields, so that was a really popular thing back in the day. Primer field energy. And primer or primer bowls, I've heard it pronounced primer, where you've got these magnetically amplified bowls that pull in, like a gravity well, pull in this energy, and then they're able to create this artificial, but is it artificial gravity, to where even non-magnetic balls, orbs, spheres, right, will begin to rotate about, right, to go into this sort of axiomatic pathos and play. There still are existent some amazing video footage on that, and all of a sudden, I mean, they were pushing this really hard about 14, 15 years ago, and it's obvious when government programs come along and either silence them, give them money, or say, yeah, we're going to be working on this. And kind of like Stephen Greer a little bit. I'm not saying that Stephen Greer's on that level where he's developing anything per se, but to say that he thinks, just like Tom DeLonge, they think they're on this level, right? So as long as they're They're told, oh, wow, you're really important. We're going to take you for some meetings. You're going to meet some people. And none of that's true. Those people pass. Those people are gone. Different people are in charge. As long as your needs are met as far as what type of acknowledgement you think you require, and you're told whatever it is that Chris Bledsoe is told, right? Ryan Bledsoe, his son, is told something different by his father, that he was told that these are like Sasquatch from like Mars or some shit like that. No joke. That he told his son that it was actually Hathor. So this gets parallel with Mother Circe and like total witch energy, right? When he was talking about this holy mother or this pure source. And Jake Barber is back in the picture, right? And then they just play with these variables, and it's not partisan. There's nothing partisan about it. If you supplicate to the partisan concept or the partisan idea or ideology, you're showing your stripes. You're showing that you can be bent. Your will can be bent. That you can think in a staunch way just for the effects of worldly materialism, right? So, like, I find the permeability and the flux refreshing with the far left, but I also would never group myself in with that. Last year, I would have placed myself on the right before all this Trump bullshit. I almost bought into it. I'm not calling myself perfect or well calibrated on any measure. I don't think any of us are. Okay? What I'm saying is even when you have it in front of you that these principles are so vital and so important, and that it's not the person, it's not the existential disparate aggression, and that's ultimately what we're taught over and over again. It's like aggression changes things. A violent force changes the direction of everything. But I never thought that Charlie Kirk was regarded on such a level, right? Or now even to some measure canonized, right? Well, they poured a lot of money into him. You know, I was just really annoyed by him and found his small stature, his small state of mind, his limited ideas. I could see the influence behind him. I think he was actually a very scary figure in the sense that, oh, you could produce somebody like this out in the open. You could go ahead and go on Wikipedia. I put it up. Look at the funding. Look at how he was seeded from prior to being 18 years old. He was being seeded to the far right. Nobody questions that, right? Or Trump's, when you look at all this and how this rotary motion takes place, you see that Trump's ideation with Israel and, right? You begin to see it all and it's like, wait a minute. So I think the thing that the far right does far too often is they're very bold and brazen about showing all their cards. But they show all their cards by gaslighting and blaming the far left for doing exactly what they do, I can't stomach the far right in this day. It's become something else, right? And I'm not going to say that each side accuses the other of Nazism. Do you notice that? They accuse each other of the same exact thing. Do I want, would I want my little children to be babysat by some, what they call unicorn, right, person? Or maybe not. But under the guise of principle, checks and balances, right, that wouldn't take place. In other words, you have this individual who's trying to state themselves as an individual because they must be the contrast of this staunchy right-wing ideation, right? But I don't believe in either side. And I find all of the campaigning of all their ideas completely undeveloped, right? So the problem is that we're not going enough steps with any idea, and that there's a quick argument and a quick gain that takes place on either side. In other words, you posit or postulate a certain item of interest, abortion, gun laws, you throw something out, and then you take it a step further where you're throwing in more complexity, and they will come back and try to rebalance and say, no, that's exactly why. And they'll try to bring you down to this syllogistic 1, 2, 3 thought process. And that's what I saw Charlie Kirk as. He was always recalibrating and rebalancing and bringing things back to a simple scale of a small-minded proposal, right? Just like Trump. So my whole thing is, look at how people are influenced by the political process in procession or power today, any given time. In other words, those same people, if they knew what Charlie Kirk's trajectory was on, where he was going, and what he ultimately would have done with that small-minded syllogistic fixation, they wouldn't feel the way that they do, but they're so easily pulled through this Plutchik's wheel of emotional propagation, right? And this gets back into deeper complex thoughts of, look, you think that neurolinguistic programming and glandular secretions aren't that pronounced or important, but if they can make you feel a certain way through symbolism, through suggestivity, where they're highlighting certain words, highlighting certain news pieces, putting out there in the forefront frequencies and the bombardment of expedient anxiety and nervousness, you're never going to think further than what your glands are able to produce through the secretion of adrenaline, serotonin, dopamine. You will be bouncing back and forth, and then you'll just be left with, well, I need to get to work, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. And the first person who says, we want to give you money, we want to give you education, we want to give you possibilities, right? I didn't realize that Charlie Kirk's reach had reached what it did, because I put over and over again for 3 months straight, do not show me this ad, to the point where I was becoming pissed off. Do not show me this ad again. Next day, they pushed the ad even more aggressively at me. I did this for 3 months straight, maybe even 4. And all the way up until last week, maybe even this week. To the point where it's like I couldn't stand Charlie Kirk's face, right? And then I would go, there was 1 or 2 times where I would go, okay, look, let's go back and listen to another one of his debates, and let's see if I was being a little premature, even though I've watched tons of them, right? And I saw the way he alienated and ostracized certain people, and he just didn't quit. So he used this neurolinguistic programming tool that really is a synesthesia type of tool, right? Before they were really associating synesthesia with, it's always been like this, to smell certain colors, to have this smell, taste, and even thought, smell, taste, right? Ability to be able to do certain things prior to that being established on its own little so-called wheel or diametrical unitized way of seeing how much this sinks into an individual and how they're put together, was that factor to be manipulated in most people. So in other words, like there's a whole thing called the October Man, where if you could get somebody to relate with a symbol, right, and go back in time into their memories and relate one of their best times and possibly one of their worst times to a certain symbol, something that was given to them, right? You were given a flower on a beach when you were, or through trauma, that didn't happen. So imagine if this did happen. You're back on that beach where that terrible thing took place. You're only 4 years old. And that symbol of a flower, somebody came along and they gave you that flower. And that flower was so pure and it had such emanating energy of happiness. And you took that flower and you were still so young and believed in a world of possibilities, and you had this purity about you, right? And you were able to take that symbol and turn it into pure energy and put it inside of you and swallow it down and dilate it and grow it and shrink it and move it about you, right? And so you could look at this as yoga or Reiki or any sort of, moving your chi or your ki energy, right? But you're working with the proponents of your own energy and your ability to highlight and focus the energy in certain areas and of a certain amplitude or size, right? And this leads into how we're being manipulated, right? Is that people are beginning to back belief systems that if you were to talk to them as an individual and you said, really, you're not under any pressure. In fact, here's $5,000. Does that make you feel better? If it can just buy me 5 minutes with you to where you don't have any anxiety, in your mind, I'll let you factor through it, for 10 minutes before you start to dial back and go, oh, holy shit, $5,000 does nothing for me, right? But that initial feeling of I can pay all my bills, I can pay rent this month, I might even buy a couple Christmas presents and stash them away. Okay, I'm happy, right? And once you can take that pressure point off and you can say, now I'd really like to know, right? Somebody's going to come in, they're not partisan, they just want to know, they want to ask you 5 questions, right? 5 questions of your true beliefs. And your name's not going to go down in anything. Nobody's going to be told any of this information except through a general database, right? And we're not trying to buy your opinion. We're not of the right. We're not of the left. You got to have somebody who goes in without a fancy suit or maybe on the other side, blue hair, right? And here you go, right? And the answers that person came up with versus what they would say under the pressure of mounting bills, a broken down car, the inability to be able to pay for your child's daycare, right? And the false promises of being cut short of a certain leader or ideology that just didn't pan out. Kind of like what's going on with Trump, but went on with Biden, what happens all the time, all these false promises, right? And then that's usually the area that people stay stuck in and play this tennis game with each other, racketing back and forth. No, the partisan ruler or leader, majority leader that I backed here, stuck to their promises and followed through with what they're saying, right? And none of them do. None of them have. None of them did. So what you're left with at the end of the day is that you've never asked yourself what is important, what the primary principles are that in a world, if you were to create a perfect world, the perfect tapestry, and there was no limitation as to how you could craft it. And even more so, say you had the ability to be able to live in that world. And if your mind was going to these dark places, you would feel the full effect of the world you created, even the shadow world, the totality of what you're manifesting as energy and the thoughts that are creeping in. And you were told, if you want to build a more positive world, you're going to have to start thinking about your subconscious. You're going to have to start thinking about what's going on in the recesses of your mind that are influencing your ability to build the world model that you will invariably live in, right? So this morphic field resonance is happening all the time. And this is the number one thing. What do they call this? Loosh energy. It's like soul energy, but it's also gets into materia prima materia. for substance, but then they like to sexualize this and bastardize this, like through the sacred or the mystic mushroom concept, right? Allegra, right? They want to say that this is all sexual, right? Because this is where people's minds are drawn to. This is where the collective mind is drawn to. And even more so, to prove this point, you have this torsion field energy of these mounds, pyramids. The woman who came and said and told young Sadi's father, the Zoroaster, we're going to take over and raise him the rest of the way. She was point blank asked by the father, well, where do you come from? You can't just take off with my kid, right? And she goes, we come from up here, right? And you look up there, you look through a telescope. What do you mean up there? And there's oftentimes this mirror world that is suggested that isn't a far distance away from us, but is actually just above us, right? And maybe an influence of the higher mind, right? In another light spectrum and another frequency, right? However you want to put it. But that it's not far. It's in other words, it's not far removed, and so isolated an idea or a concept, because the communication between the father and this woman was more than fluid, right? And so if you're wanting to look into the Zoroaster, I highly recommend it. And I do recommend looking at Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche to really get a good take on this as well, and to possibly read this around the same time, because it's really intense. You'll walk away when you do read that Nietzsche actually sounds very much like an ardent, perspicacious-minded Christian, right? There are moments, if you've read a lot of Friedrich Nietzsche, you will walk away with the fact that this guy sounds, but in all practical matters, he was saying, we need to embrace and look at the complexity. We need to stop. So it's so shameful the time we're in right now, where we've been reduced down to this syllogistic mindset where people become angry at you and they're essentially yelling at you and calling you non sequitur, right? And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, are we really going to stay on this sagittal plane of existence and pretend that the transverse and the frontal plane don't exist, or that the transverse plane and the frontal plane, you know, when you get into the pick of certain social or socialized systems, communism, capitalism, right? Outright Republican or republic-minded contracts versus democracy, that these people have to live within a certain plane system, right? Like, you could say that the Democrats are forced into living in this frontal plane where everything that they have to do, they have to go almost like a knight, right? Or a rook, right? They almost have to go in this L-shaped sort of like pattern, more like a knight, right? But then you get into this kingship or really the queenship, and it's like then you can start thinking more diagonally and syllogistically, right? So this is more like the Republican aspect of it. But then the transverse is where you have to go around the bowl, like around the gravity well, around, right? It always, so then you get into the corporate socialism and all the shit that's happening now, where it's like, we're going to pretend we're socialists, right? These corporations, we're going to pretend we're socialists. We're going to circle around. We're going to use that spherical energy, and then we're going to come in and pay off all these politicians of the right and left and be able to move throughout the chessboard any way we want. And then suddenly, boom, right? You got this pawn and passant. So, fair, unfair, freeing yourself through consciousness, coming to the stage of total development as an individual. It is all about energy. So I guess my biggest question is how is it that the physical corporeal aspects that seem so mundane, right, can go on? Like, the slaughter of animals, the processing of the meat, right? Time itself, and staying on this sort of Alice in Wonderland, we're late for an important date bullshit, right? Where you have just these different personality variants that are only capable of stretching themselves so far and doing so many things. And this really reaches into Abraxas, that really reaches into to the animalistic aspects that you find throughout Asia and around the world, India, right? Where they equate certain movement patterns, not necessarily just in martial arts or Krav Maga or any of these other movement patterns that lead back to this yoga, which is really what it is. It's embracing an energy from outside of you, exciting the field with that energy, and then manifesting from that energy and motion a certain item or production, right? And then to perfect this, right? So you have to ask yourself, where did the 90 degrees of sorrow, how we build now, Crow 777, right? Where did that idea come from? We would like to say, oh, those are the simplest joint structures. It's the most straightforward way. But it's like, that's not necessarily true. It depends on what part of the world you come from. If bamboo was something that was more readily available, which you look at it and you're like, yeah, wow, then more of a circular domicile would make more sense. But when you get into those type of yurts, you can feel the energy culminating. I mean, those are the places you want to go meditate, right? So there was even that guy who built the flying saucer. I don't remember, but it was like in the 1950s. And this guy who supposedly was visited by what I say are more UAPs than UFOs, right? You could say, what's the difference? And it's like, well, more and more UFOs are starting to be more put into a certain grouping where it's like these are non-human biologics, and then UAPs are, now that we have heard the next set of bullshit that Lockheed is a gatekeeper for reverse engineering, anti-gravitic reverse engineering, which I think is a complete and total misnomer. I think they're misleading people intentionally because gravity isn't as important. In other words, I think gravity is something that can be bypassed, and it is being artificially suspended by and amplified by way of not just planetary placement, right, or using the zodiac and the metallurgies that are found on the moon and in certain planets, right, to sort of like lock in this gravity tensioner, right, relationship, but is actually being amplified. And that's why I really enjoy, and I've always enjoyed looking at what Crow 777, CRROW 77, has to say about it, because he really does seem to go to that next level where right now he's capturing amazing images of the sun. So if you're not someone who is familiar with Crow, I would highly recommend going in and checking out his channel. He's just trying to stay afloat, and he wants to get better camera equipment. And it really is. So they could never capture a good image of the sun until they realized that it was because there's all this radiation and noise, right? So they started to take that into account and then started to get these better images. But what Crow 77 is using is this really expensive equipment that kind of bypasses and goes past all of that, where you're actually able to catch really good, clean, pure, actual images, right? Because it's taking a picture on a certain spectral imaging, right? And I suppose these cameras cost like, I think he was saying between 10 and 20 grand or something for just one of these cameras. And then, of course, he's going to need to have good software, a fucking computer that can keep up with all that, And it's amazing the images that come back, because there's a lot of depictions. So what I posited and realized many years ago, going on 15 years ago, is what happens in one sphere can potentially happen in another sphere. But there are certain constants of parallel constants like gas, extreme hot, extreme cold, when you get into absolute zero and absolute hot, when you get into certain gases that might exist there, when you get into the metallurgy, when you get into, like, this gets into where the pyramids are, where the troughs and the dips are, where like the deep caverns in the oceans might be or might have been, right? When you get into all this and you have this parallel aspect, I believe that, and have for many, many years, that the reason it seems like these beings, so-called beings, can come and go, sort of phasing in and out at their will, is because they're actually transposed, right? And building from another, almost like photon pairing, or getting into shift light, right? Where you have the photon collision rate happening at a certain speed that produces, say, red shift versus blue shift, right? So you get into all this and into the complexities, and it might sound like it's just way above and way over our heads, but when you have this think tank, right, of possibilities, when you have CERN, when you have all these other experiments running for years, and it's well financed and it's happening through these black projects, you have these gatekeeper organizations that would only implicate and show the very tip of the iceberg. So the things that we've seen, I believe, have more to do with this sort of phasing in, phasing out, that's using, for lack of a photon pairing type of energy, right? Where one can actually replace the other. It sounds really infantile and mundane, but the most recent Peacemaker, Cena, right? The most recent Peacemaker, it kind of gets into this in a very simplistic way. So if you haven't seen it, I think it's on episode 6 now of the second season. And that's really, honestly, I would say that's the only reason I watch it. But I'm from a tacky sense, I'm a fan of the show. It doesn't mean I'm a fan of John Cena. It doesn't mean that I believe in the capitalistic proselytizing and pushing of certain campaigns, or that I align myself. It's like food. It's like, this food's here, it's in front of me, I can eat it. Just like when I talk about beef liver, right? So when I'm on carnivore, I tend to eat beef liver every single day. I find that I get low in certain nutrients much faster, and that it gives me that sort of resilience and that energy, but really boosts up my iron levels. When I'm taking in all these carbohydrates and I'm like 50 or 60 pounds heavier, I don't require the same frequency. In fact, it starts to make me sick. I start to look jaundice. I start to take in too much vitamin A because I'm getting that because I'm eating so many more calories and have calories from so many different sources, right? So, and also my body is hanging on to every little bit, it's anabolic. I will be going back to the carnivore, but with that said, it's only because what's available to me at the time to render a certain result, right? But if I was to take that concept that I was talking about earlier and say, what if all of our technology, what if all of our focus went into figuring out how to develop the most beneficent, efficient system of getting those calories, getting those nutrients in, right? You start to see that we wouldn't be eating at all. We would store a lot of the carbon-based structures within our bodies that would take up almost no room at all. And then by taking a pill or two, we'd be able to recombinate and activate the responses of certain, and the production, right? To where we would probably only have to breathe in gases and drink liquid. And there would be enough there, right? There would be enough component to come up with all the amino acids, right? To produce the demand for the heat, because calories are a measurement of heat. So how essential is actually a calorie? It actually ages us and breaks us down, right? And if all that energy could be directed exclusively through the production of heat, right? And to be able to cool at those times where we even got better sleep and we were able to, work on our basal metabolic rate, circadian rhythm, slow wave sleep cycle, right? If we were to get this, our chronobiology down, right? And then even more so to assist growth hormone release, right? To have a constant monitor of every nutrient in our bodies, right? We would end up looking like they've posited, what was it? Neoteny, right? Where we find more undeveloped childlike features more attractive. We trust people with bigger eyes, a big forehead, a big baby head type of thing, right? There's this propensity, but even more so, this gets into the detail of, is this happening? Like when you see someone like Brian Shaw or even Eddie Hall, you start to look at how they look like big, huge babies. The more developed you are, the bigger your muscles are, the more you are replenished. It's almost like this, right? This generational staging tries to produce itself, but then is held back by the strong and weak nuclear forces and gravity itself, right? As if we were trying to emanate. We're trying to absorb energy and emanate, right? Yeah, so my 55-pound dumbbell is supposed to be here today. That's why I'm not training right now. It's kind of annoying me. But I'm going to need to fuel up, and then within the next couple of hours after I digest that meal, I'm going to be going in, and hopefully my dumbbell will be here. And thank you to my son Antonio for sponsoring me on that. I'm not going to let you down, man. It's time to give it my all and come with it.